And for more on the situation in Zimbabwe, we're joined now by Terence Mukupe, who's the former Zimbabwe Deputy Finance Minister. Very good evening to you, Mr. Mukupe. Thank you so much for speaking to us. First of all, let me ask you to please comment of what you heard Professor Lumumba say there. What's your reaction?
I have so much respect for Professor Lumumba, and at least he's coming to us and not being prescriptive and not being judgmental. But I think I don't necessarily agree with him in the sense that I don't know why anyone would agitate for a situation that we should have a government of national unity. As far as I'm concerned, people have to look at the reasons why we're having the problems that we're having. And we've just come out of elections, which I believe our opposition initially felt that they'd been cheated off. They went to the courts and they lost. And there's no election that's taking place. So what you have at the present moment in Zimbabwe is what I would call agitation propaganda, where you basically know that for a fact that you've got countries and NGOs that have a narrative that they want to push. And because they have a narrative that they want to push, they go out.
What is that narrative in your view? Because we've seen in the past doctors, nurses who have protested saying that they wanted better pay, who have been videoed, being beaten, being harassed. We've had citizens of Zimbabwe who've been protesting against the conditions. They're complaining about hunger, high fuel prices, whom when they've protested, they've been captured themselves, being beaten, being harassed. So it's not only just members of the opposition.
The part about the being beaten part, that's something that's news to me. You see, what you have to be careful of is that you are having situations where people are recycling old images of past protests that happened in 2016, 2017, and are trying to make them seem as if that's what's actually happening on the ground. Make no mistake, life is difficult in Zimbabwe, but what people are not wanting to address is what's causing the difficulties. Let's address the issue of sanctions. I think if you were to move the entire South African government and bring it into Zimbabwe and say, please come and govern Zimbabwe under the current conditions that we're under, no one would succeed under such an environment.
I'd like to challenge something, Mr. Mukupe. Are you aware that some of us as journalists do know some of these individuals who've been subjected to such beatings, and we know such individuals who've shared videos, who've showed photos of themselves, and I can certainly assure you that they are not old recycled videos, that these are real people and of real incidents. Why is it that there's this continual dogged denial that people are being hurt?
Okay, so the videos you're showing right now, as an example, those were from the food riots. That's not what happened during the past corruption march that was supposed to take place. This is again the misinformation that I'm talking about. Because what you had was a situation where there was an announcement that people wanted to march against corruption, right? But like you know very well that like the country is under lockdown because of the World Health Organization guidelines. And you can't be marching when there's a World Health Organization.
Can I ask you something, Mr. Mukupe? In the past, when there have been accusations of people being beat, including members of the opposition during the previous regime, were those also untrue? Were those also doctored images, videos?
That's why I've just related to you that there were things that happened during the food riots, the 2016, 2017 riots. Those things did happen. But I'm saying at the present moment, what's being reported is not what's on the ground. So clearly there's some other motive. Let me give you an example. You've got the national disaster regulations in South Africa. And your regulations are basically saying people cannot gather. And today you saw what the police did to the Zimbabweans that turned up at the High Commission here in Johannesburg. You used rubber bullets with them. You dispersed those crowds. I'm not hearing anyone saying that you infringed on their human rights. When we do exactly the same thing in Zimbabwe, because you've got rules and regulations that have to be followed, then you start talking about human rights.
So what about people who are members of the opposition who have protested the conditions there, what is happening not only to their comrades, but just basic human rights not being respected according to them, who there have been reports of them being abducted, there have been reports of rapes, there have been reports of people who are missing. While I would like to hear and believe what you're saying, is it possible that every single matter that has been brought before the international community, that it can be dismissed like that? And it's very interesting that in the past you've said there's a cancer in our society, there's a cult sort of politics that occurs, and you put it squarely at the feet of President Robert Mugabe. Was he a lone actor? You said even people in ZANU-PF were afraid. So has President Mnangagwa's presence expunged all of that? And does that mean that it is impossible that what occurred in the past can occur now?
You see, the problem that we have is that we've got an immature opposition politicians. It's okay for you to lose an election.
But you're not answering my question, Mr. Mukupu. I've asked a question. You have admitted in the past that these things have happened. So could you please answer that question?
And all I'm saying is that there are things that have happened in the past. But things that have happened in the past should not then be treated as if that's what's happening right now. Let's be fair. Because if you now take things that have happened in the past and then you make them seem as if that's what's happening right now.
The more direct question is, was it because of the orchestration of an individual to lay all of this at the feet of President Robert Mugabe? Are you saying it is inconceivable that this could happen under President Mnangagwa? That's all I'm asking.
I think what you notice is that the current new dispensation and the opposition joined hands and everyone celebrated when we got rid of President Mugabe. So that was a collective effort of all the Zimbabweans because we felt that we did not want to live under those conditions. So the situation where we ended up having a new dispensation coming up cannot be attributed to ZANU-PF alone. You've got images where the opposition...
So is that an admittance then that the situation that is present, it does happen, but it cannot just be attributed to ZANU-PF? So is there an admission in that?
What we are disputing is the fact that there's all these abductions that you're talking about. What you're disputing about
is there perhaps one abduction?
There are no abductions to talk of. If there were any abductions, I'm saying, can you substantiate that? Let's not sensationalize because there's a narrative that you want to build.
It's not me, Mr. Mukupe, and I'd please implore you to please stay with us. Terence Mukupe is a former Zimbabwe Deputy Finance Minister, because I'm sure you would appreciate to listen to a different perspective. Dewa Mavinga is a Southern Africa Director for Human Rights Watch. He joins us now to talk about this. Mr. Mavinga, are you with us?
Yes, and good evening to you and to the viewers and listeners.
You've been listening into that conversation with Mr. Mukupe. What is your response? What do you say? He says it's all made up. We are all trying to push an agenda. And it seems to me as if the whole world, everybody other than ZANU-PF or the governing party in Zimbabwe, believes that the world is against them and is making up this whole story. Why should we believe that? Why is that the case? Why is he right in saying this?
Well, Terence Mukupe of ZANU-PF is insulting Zimbabweans. He is insulting victims of abuses. He is insulting Mduduzi Matutu, the ZimLive editor, whose nephew, Tawanda Mcheiwa, was abducted at his home on 30th of July and was brutally tortured over the next 3 days and sprayed all over his body with an unknown substance, and only dumped back at the home of Matutu on the night of the 4 days later. And in that particular case, it was the police and the army who were involved in the abduction. Mcheiwa was missing from Bulawayo police custody, and it had to take an order from the High Court, which was issued to demand that the police investigate and present Mcheiwa in court, which was done after Mchewa was brutally beaten up, that 22-year-old young student whose only crime was to be related to a journalist, Mduduzi Matutu, who had exposed high-level corruption in Zimbabwe.
But Mr. Mukupe says that all of these things are, fiction. Talk to us about Itai Dzamara. What he's basically saying is that nobody's producing proof, and we've seen visuals of some of these journalists before they are arrested, some of them before that. There's been various documentations of some of these instances, but Mr. Mukupe would have us believe that all of these are not, genuine, or their veracity needs to be. So why should we believe it? Why should we believe some of these visuals that are circulated?
What Terence Mukupe is saying is nonsensical, really, because I, myself, as a human rights researcher, I was in Harare. I interviewed women, for example, in January last year. 17 women were raped by soldiers in uniform and with weapons, soldiers driving army vehicles. I interviewed families of people who had been shot and killed on the streets of Harare. I can talk of Choto in Chitungwiza, who was shot and killed outside of a police station. So I know the people are there. I'm giving you an example of an abduction that happened on the 30th of July this year, on the eve of the protest. And this was Tawanda Mchewa, a 22-year-old, the nephew of Mduduzi Matutu. And this is factual, it is known. There was a high court case that was head of habeas corpus to present the body because the young man was missing in police custody.
ZANU-PF insists that all of this is information that is not bona fide. It insists even in its diplomatic communication to insist that it is rumors. Why is this? And for instance, I'd like you to look at the communication that ZANU-PF sent out in relation to what the ANC Secretary General had said in raising concern about the reports coming out of there, saying, first of all, and I paraphrase by saying, mind your own business. And today it says, we're glad that you are sending envoys so that they can get the real story on the ground. I think if, and I say this with absolutely no disrespect, if I was an alien and I was listening to all of it, I'd get horribly confused. Why there's such disparate views, accounts of what is going on there? Why is it so easy to insist that people who are dead are not dead, people who are beaten have not been beaten, people who have been raped have not been raped, people who, journalists who are abducted and disappear? Why is it so easy?
I think we're dealing with a government in Zimbabwe that is delusional, that believes too much in its own propaganda, and that refuses to acknowledge the facts. They have lost all credibility. But there is a solution. When the 3 young women were raped, were abused sexually, were tortured after abduction on the 13th of May, MP Joanna Mamombe, Cecilia Chimbiri, and Netsai Marova, what happened was that the UN special procedures offered to go into Zimbabwe to investigate independently. So if Zimbabwe has nothing to hide, let them allow for international independent investigators from the UN to go in and see for themselves, because we know what has been happening. We have spoken to families of people who have been killed on the streets. We have got their post-mortem documents. We have got their names and birth certificates and ID numbers. We have spoken to women who have been raped.
What burden does this place on diplomacy? I'm thinking of the envoys, Mr. Mafamadi and Ms. Mbete, who are going to be to Harare to try and create some sort of channel for discussion, and even from the AU and the international community. What challenges do they face in the face of this? Would they even allow for independent, as it were, investigators to come and investigate these claims? But by the way, Mr. Mukupe also says that the opposition needs to take responsibility for the current situation. Do you disagree?
Well, I think the challenge is that the South African Special Envoy will face would really be about accessing information. They should not limit themselves to the official ZANU-PF channels. They must be independent and have unfettered access to civil society groups, to the churches, to families of victims, to reports by journalists. They must go out and do a proper independent investigation for them to arrive at the truth. And we need more such envoys to go into Zimbabwe so that we can open up, so that the world can see what is happening. And as for the opposition supposedly taking responsibility, as Mukupe is saying, I think it's really neither here nor there, because the responsibility is with Mnangagwa and the sitting government. There has been high-level corruption. In one particular case, over $60 million worth of COVID-19 equipment just siphoned like that. And when journalists expose that, like Wopo Chingono, they get arrested. Chingono today is
Mr.
custody.
Mavinga, I want you to just stay with us. We still have Mr. Mukupe on the line, and I'd like to hear from him what's his response. There's been a long list of people who've been affected, Mr. Mukupe. What is your response? And you hear what Mr. Mavinga is saying, that there's clear evidence that exists.
I guess it's evidence in his mind. Is it even believable that soldiers raped 17 women with guns? And
Why would it be unbelievable? It is a phenomenon that is known throughout the African continent, that women have been brutally raped as a result of conflict, that they've been...
African culture. It's African culture for soldiers to be raping women.
I did not say that. I'm saying that exists. It does exist.
I don't subscribe to that. People of Zimbabwe have suffered long enough. They deserve a break.
Are they not suffering now, Mr. Mukupe?
Allow me. I didn't see you haggling Mr. Mavima, Deo Mavima. The people of Zimbabwe have suffered long enough. The issue that we have at the present moment, why our economy is not functioning, it's because of the issue of the sanctions that are there. And then you've got people that come to Zimbabwe with preconceived notions about what's going on in the country. People need a break. We need to continue with our lives. Give us a chance for us to be able to function as Zimbabweans. That's all we are asking. And the other thing is that, you hear of that, there's so many people that have been killed. There's all these abductions and everything. And what's always interesting is that you're told that someone has been abducted, and then the next thing is people then turn up in these phantom areas. And most of the time, none of these abductions have been able to be proven in any court. And let me tell you something else about the Zimbabwean law. If you feel that the police are not carrying out their duty, you can actually apply for a license to go and carry out private prosecution. And I've never seen any of these activists applying for a license to prosecute privately if they feel that the government is not carrying out its job. But I guess at the end of the day, some people make a living out of seeing the people of Zimbabwe suffering.
Is it because you, and I ask this with the greatest respect, that you have never known anybody who has suffered these kinds of abuses? And I asked this, Mr. Mukupe, if somebody that you know came to you and said, this is what happened to me, I've been raped by soldiers, or I was abducted by police and I was beaten, would you be so quick to dismiss it as fiction? I mean, we've just spoken about the fact that it is a historical fact that women have been raped in conflict as a consequence of conflict, as as spoils of war. You've dismissed it outright as never having ever occurred. So I'm just curious, would you ever believe somebody who came to you that you knew that reported that to you?
My sister, you're talking as if Zimbabwe is a war zone. It's not a war zone. And if the police and the army were as unprofessional as what you're saying, then do you think the United Nations was going to allow them to participate in peace missions? Because they are rapists, according to what you're saying.
That's not what I said, Mr. Mukupe. I think you're taking huge liberties here. Let's hear from Mr. Mavinga. And I see you're trying to play footloose with what I'm saying. You're not going to be very successful, Mr. Mavinga. What is your thought of that? I think it's a fair question that Mr. Mukupe raises, that why is the United Nations still allowing Zimbabwe to participate?
Well, Terence Mkupe has a point, and in fact, as human rights activists, we are also raising the same question, that in fact, Zimbabwean soldiers and the police should not be allowed to partake in any of these peacekeeping missions because of the abuses ongoing in Zimbabwe. So that is another focus, that we should really have a serious investigation before Zimbabwean police can venture out within UN missions. And we are beginning to hear more voices from within the UN about the need to stop abuses happening in Zimbabwe. One of the challenges that is happening with Zimbabwe is that there is no rule of law. When the soldiers and the police commit abuses, there is no accountability, there is no way to go. These women that I interviewed in Epworth, in Harare, who had been raped by soldiers, when they went to the police refused to receive their complaints. So they had no way to go, and they are too afraid.
What about Zimbabwe's judiciary? Mr. Mkupe mentioned earlier on that there's nobody who's really won a case as a result of such complaints or allegations. So we have seen that there have been very few successes. Why is that, to your mind, Mr. Mavinga?
Well, the first thing is that the police refuse to receive cases and to investigate. But as to, there have been some prosecutions. For example, there is this high-level case of Justina Mkoko, who was abducted by state agents and tortured over 3 weeks. Her case was successful in the courts, and she was paid compensation for the pain and injury that she suffered as a result of torture. So that is on record. But what we're saying is that we need a broader investigation, because when state institutions participate in abuses, it becomes difficult to hold them accountable. In terms of the Constitution of Zimbabwe, Section 210, there should be an independent complaints mechanism to receive complaints of abuse by the security forces. But so far, the government of Zimbabwe has refused to operationalize that complaints mechanism. So it is not there. So how can the police themselves? That is the challenge in Zimbabwe.
Mr. Mkupe, do you think that Zimbabwe's judiciary needs re-looking into? Is it out of touch with the people of Zimbabwe?
It is just spoken of the Justina Mkoko case, which was successful. And what he's also forgetting to tell you, all these things that he's talking about are things that happened during the Mugabe dispensation. And I would also want to challenge him. He's talking about these women. He keeps talking about these women who were raped in Epworth. I would want to invite the SABC with their cameras live on TV, together with Mr. Dewa. I'll accompany him to Epworth and collect these 17 women he's talking about. And we'll go together to the nearest police station and see if they won't accept the case that he's talking about.
Do you think after what they've suffered that they would be willing to do that, Mr. Mkupe? Do you think that they would not fear secondary, tertiary victimization?
These again are what I'm talking about, like propaganda. You've got agitation propaganda, and you've got people who are making a career out of calling themselves human rights activists. And then when there's no activity, they don't get paid. So you have to create things so that you get paid.
Mr. Mavinga, what's your response to that?
Sorry, I'm offering myself, Mr. Mavinga. I'll accompany you.
My response is that it is well and good, but I'll give you an example. I said on May 13, 3 young opposition activists, Joanna Cecilia and Netsai, were abducted from police custody in Harare and tortured and sexually abused, and then dumped, and they spent weeks in hospital. The government said it was fake. They were in fact charged with a fake abduction after they suffered severe injuries and spent weeks in hospital, and still today they remain traumatized. So this is the complexity, that you have state institutions that are participating in the abuse and covering it up as well.
Okay, I want to thank you both, honestly, for speaking to us. Dewa Mavinga is Southern Africa Director for Human Rights, and we've just had with us Terence Mkupe, who is a former Zimbabwe Finance Minister. Thank you very much to both of you, and hopefully we do continue with the discussion and do take you up on that offer, Mr. Mkupe, that the SABC is given access to those who are making these accusations, and that they're able to carry out their work without fear manner of intimidation as well. Thank you very much to you both. In other news, an Air India Express jet carrying almost